The Trump Justice Department just came up with one weird trick to put protesters in jail. Sure, okay, the First Amendment literally protects the right of assembly, but what if we pretend that protests are a conspiracy and then we lock up everyone who shows up if one person breaks the law? What do you think? Sounds legit? Well, they're still workshopping it. As a first step, though, they just indicted a U.S. congressional candidate and several local politicians in Illinois for protesting outside a detention facility where immigrants are reportedly being held in horrible, inhumane conditions for days or even weeks. You know you're on the right side of the law when you find yourself shooting a priest in the head with a pepper ball. But first, who is Kat Abu-Ghazaleh?
Congressional candidate Kat Abu-Ghazaleh.
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 Catherine Abu-Ghazaleh is a 26-year-old activist and social media star with a talent for making content go viral. In 2023, she took a position with the left-leaning media outlet Media Matters for America, where she described her job as, "I watch Tucker Carlson so you don't have to."
If you don't watch Fox News, here are 5 totally real and definitely not made up stories that you might have missed.
She's also an outspoken advocate for progressive social causes, particularly Palestinian rights. Here she is protesting the exclusion of pro-Palestinian speakers at the Democratic National Convention in 2024.
The DNC has specifically declined to allow Palestinian Americans to speak on stage tonight.
In March of 2025, Abu-Ghazaleh announced that she was running for Congress in Illinois' 9th District.
It's time to drop the excuses and grow a fucking spine. I'm Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, and I'm running for Congress in Illinois' 9th District.
That seat has been held by Democrat Jan Schakowsky for 25 years, and at the time Abu-Ghazaleh declared, Schakowsky had not yet announced her retirement. Abu-Ghazaleh's campaign focused on social justice issues and the need for generational change in political leadership. Her unabashed progressive values and her telegenic presence invites comparisons to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It also causes men to be deeply weird on Maine.
A woman with a sultry voice along the lines of a 1970s FM radio female disc jockey, Abu-Ghazaleh is the sort who would purr, "Now that you're tucked into bed for the evening, let's hear a track from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon to send you off to dreamland." I am talking like a normal person. You are the one drawing those conclusions.
Ew. But things really kicked off when the Trump administration surged immigration agents into Chicago and started grabbing up people who looked like they might be immigrants. On September 8th, the Department of Homeland Security announced Operation Midway Blitz to, quote, target the criminal illegal aliens who flocked to Chicago and Illinois because they knew Governor Pritzker and his sanctuary policies would protect them and allow them to roam free on American streets. As in Los Angeles, the confrontations between the residents of Greater Chicagoland and immigration enforcement agents have been intense. For weeks, we've watched video after video of armed masked men throwing tear gas canisters into crowds, breaking windows and pulling people out of cars, shooting people with pepper balls, and generally beating the hell out of protesters. The immigration facility in Broadview, Illinois, is a particular flashpoint. The building was constructed to process detainees, not house them. But because of the massive uptick in deportations coupled with the Trump administration's policy of locking up all immigrants without regard for whether they pose a danger to the community, that is no longer the case. Broadview's 3 holding cells are now being used to house hundreds of detainees for days and sometimes weeks on end. According to a lawsuit filed on October 30th, immigrants are forced to sleep on concrete floors next to overflowing toilets. They get no medical care, even if they're pregnant or elderly or sick. They are denied access to counsel, and they get just 3 bottles of water a day, causing pervasive dehydration. Clergy members hold regular vigils outside, demanding to be allowed to pray with the detainees, and hundreds of Chicago area clerics signed an open letter saying Jesus is being tear-gassed at Broadview. Kat Abu-Ghazaleh has been on the front lines of that confrontation, protesting at Broadview weekly since the summer. On September 19, she was picked up and violently thrown to the ground during a peaceful protest. Conservative commentators like Laura Loomer posted that she loved watching communists get body slammed. Fox News' Laura Ingraham praised the agents on her show.
Thrown to the ground by an ICE agent. Good work.
And the Department of Homeland Security posted the video with the caption, "Individuals and groups impeding ICE operations are siding with vicious cartels, human traffickers, and violent criminals." But lots of residents of Chicago are opposed to ICE. They're not big on scenes of people getting tackled in the streets or their neighborhoods being tear gassed, and neither are courts. Multiple federal judges have issued orders barring the use of troops in military tactics in Chicago. Judge April Perry barred the federalization of the Illinois National Guard, finding that there was no emergency on the ground sufficient to justify it. Trump has spent years screaming that Chicago is the murder capital of the world, a killing field, a hellhole. That is definitely not true, but in this instance, it's really just a red herring. Because crime is generally a local law enforcement issue. The federal government isn't out there busting muggers on Main Street. That's not what the Justice Department is for. In fact, the federalization statute says that the president can call up state militias in 3 and only 3 circumstances. 1, in cases of invasion by a foreign nation. 2, if there's a rebellion. And 3, when the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws. Judge Perry found that there was no evidence that any of those preconditions had been met. She said, there is evidence of protests, some of which have included acts of violence. There is also evidence of property destruction and discrete groups who have attempted to impede DHS agents. At the same time, there is significant evidence that DHS has not been unable to carry out its mission. All federal facilities have remained open. To the extent there have been disruptions, they have been of limited duration and swiftly controlled by authorities. Pairing all this with evidence that federal immigration officials have seen huge increases in arrests and deportations, the court concludes that the factual conditions necessary for President Trump to have properly invoked Section 124063 simply do not exist. The Trump administration appealed, and the Seventh Circuit upheld Judge Perry's order. And as of this recording, the Supreme Court has refused to intervene. U.S. District Judge Sarah Ellis also found that the reality on the ground did not match DHS's overheated rhetoric and that the tactics used by ICE and especially Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP, were wildly inappropriate responses to mostly peaceful protests. She issued a temporary restraining order barring federal agents from targeting journalists, ordering protesters to leave public places where they posed no danger, use of riot control weapons, including rubber bullets, pepper balls, tear gas, and flashbangs on people who pose no immediate threat to the safety of a law enforcement officer. She told ICE to stop aiming projectiles at the head, neck, and groin of protesters, to stop tackling people who pose no actual danger unless they're being arrested, to stop throwing tear gas and pepper balls without warning, and she ordered all agents in the field to start wearing badges and body cameras. And part of the reason Judge Ellis did that was because of videos like this one.
Shame on you! Put him down!
Kat Abu-Ghazaleh did not pose a threat to those officers. They roughed her up as a disincentive to protest and to civil disobedience, and they did it because they assumed that they could get away with it. Unfortunately, we now live in a world where First Amendment protections are increasingly decided in the court of public opinion, not a court of law. In less than 24 hours, over 180 news outlets reported on the criminal charges against Kat Abu-Ghazaleh, but depending on sources you follow, it's hard to tell if they were even talking about the same case. And herein lies the real danger. It's not just facts that shape public opinion, it's how those facts are framed. When you scroll down to see how this story is being covered by every outlet, the frames can have subtle differences that make a huge impact. From the right, the Democratic congressional candidate was indicted after a violent anti-ICE protest, implying her culpability and even guilt. From the left, the same story is framed as the feds indicted the congressional candidate over protesting, suggesting the government's actions were motivated by the content of her speech, not her actions. And from the center, the headlines largely express skepticism over the government's claims, using words like allegedly when describing the charges. This type of analysis is why Ground News has been my favorite way to stay up to date with the news since 2023. So I'd like to thank them for sponsoring this video. They've been a longtime supporter of this channel and independent news media at large. Ground News is an app and website that helps me see the full picture by pulling in news from thousands of sources worldwide. I can compare coverage and uncover political bias, reliability, and most importantly, see who owns the sources reporting the news I'm reading. And it's not just me. Ground News has even been recognized by the Nobel Peace Center for its impact on media literacy. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum. If you're only getting your news from 1 or 2 places, you might miss important stories like how the $8 billion Trump diverted to pay the military during the shutdown just ran dry. No outlets on the left reported on it, or this story that the right largely ignored of the FBI raiding and detaining 400 people at a horse track in Idaho to crack down on immigrants. If you care about truth, context, and evidence like I do, I recommend you check out Ground News. It's the tool I personally rely on to stay on top of breaking news with clarity. And as a legal eaglet, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan, the same one I use, by scanning the QR code or clicking the link below. By subscribing, you're also supporting an independent news platform that's working to make the media landscape landscape more transparent and balanced. So sign up for Ground News today, and we will see you in court. On September 25th, Abu Ghazaleh was part of a crowd that briefly blocked a vehicle outside the Broadview facility.
Up with liberation! Down, down with deportation! Down, down with deportation! With liberation!
They banged on the black SUV, chanted slogans, and threw stuffed animals before being dispersed with pepper balls. Abu Ghazaleh was not arrested on that day, but on October 23rd, a special grand jury in Chicago indicted her along with 5 other co-defendants for conspiring to impede a federal agent in the conduct of his duties. The indictment alleges that the defendants conspired with one another and others known and unknown to surround a government vehicle outside the Broadview facility and banged aggressively on it to prevent Agent A from getting to work on time. They crowded together in the front and side of the government vehicle and pushed against it to hinder and impede its movement, scratched the body of the government vehicle, including etching a message into the body of the vehicle, specifically the word pig, broke one of the government vehicle's side mirrors, and broke a rear windshield wiper off the government vehicle. Note that it does not say any of the 5 individuals indicted did those things. That's the beauty of a conspiracy charge. Prosecutors can hold every member of the conspiracy criminally responsible for the whole thing. So how did these supposed co-conspirators impede Agent A in the conduct of his official duties? They physically hindered and impeded Agent A and the government vehicle such that Agent A was forced to drive at an extremely slow rate of speed to avoid injuring any of the co-conspirators, and in doing so, slowly progressed toward the BSSA to discharge the duties of his office. So TLDR, he had to drive slow. That's what happened. Agent A was a couple minutes late to work because it's illegal to run people over. That's it. And what specifically did Abu Ghazaleh do? She joined the crowd at the front of the government vehicle and with her hands on the hood, braced her body and hands against the vehicle while remaining directly in the path of the vehicle, hindering and impeding Agent A and the vehicle from proceeding to the facility. Abu Ghazaleh, who is about 110 pounds soaking wet, stopped the car by leaning on it. Got it. And for this, she's charged with forcibly impeding and intimidating and interfering with an officer of the United States, namely Agent A, while engaged in or on account of the performance of his official duties in violation of Title 18 U.S. Code Sections 111A1 and 2. And, by sheer coincidence, Abu Ghazaleh's alleged co-conspirators are also involved in Illinois politics. Her campaign field director, Andre Martin, was indicted alongside Cook County Board of Commissioners candidate Catherine Sharp and Cook County Democratic Committee member Michael Rabbitt. Oak Park Village trustee Brian Shaw says he joined the protest at the Broadview ICE detention facility because of what is happening to our immigrant neighbors, children zip-tied and shoved into vans, mothers pulled from cars on the way to school, neighbors afraid to go to church or work. He called out the DOJ's decision to seemingly handpick public officials for standing up against these inhumane policies. And from the videos, it certainly does appear that the feds specifically indicted the politicians in the crowd and left the other protesters alone. Representative Schakowsky called the indictments an alarming abuse of power and an attack on the very foundations of democracy by a wannabe dictator. And local politicians, including 6 of Abu Ghazaleh's primary opponents, put out a joint statement condemning the partisan and unethical indictments and saying, this is what happens in dictatorships and failed states. We should never accept it here. Abu Ghazaleh calls the indictment a political prosecution and an assault on the First Amendment.
My name is Kat Abu Ghazaleh. I'm running for Congress in the 9th District of Illinois, and the Department of Justice is charging 6 people, including myself, with federal crimes for exercising our First Amendment rights near ICE's Broadview Processing Center.
But the First Amendment also includes a right not to speak, as does the 5th, and Abu Ghazaleh ran into some trouble during this interview with independent journalist Tara Palmieri.
What do you think about those charges, though? They seem really serious.
Yeah,
Conspiracy to impede or injure an ICE officer, assaulting or impeding that officer. Those are pretty big charges.
Tara, once again, this is my first time being federally indicted. Like I said,
Yeah.
I plan on pleading not guilty. The evidence will come out in court, and I plan on winning. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Just really quickly, I did want to ask you about just the fact that conspiracy to impede an officer is up to 6 years in prison, forcibly impeding and intimidating an officer is up to 8 years. Is that that could actually hinder your ability to serve in Congress? Are you concerned about that? Did she just sign off? Did she just leave the chat?
Palmieri referred to Abu Ghazaleh's abrupt exit as shocking, but Palmieri, who's been a political journalist for more than a decade and recently left mainstream media to start her own Substack and YouTube channel, has certainly interviewed people who don't want to answer a direct question. She knows that no smart defendant would agree to discuss the specifics of her case in public, but lawyers were universally horrified that Abu Ghazaleh would have even put herself in a position to be asked. Plaintiff's attorney Max Kennerly pronounced her today's winner of the Please Shut the F*** Up award. Palmieri framed the walk-off as the next generation of politicians isn't afraid of the internet, just the questions, which, well, the attention economy is a tough place to make a living, but if you're snarking that kids these days aren't good at media, well, good luck. As for Abu Ghazaleh, she was back at it on Halloween with her campaign hosting a blood drive and a bone marrow donation registry.
Today, my campaign is having their backlot Halloween bash. So come on down, donate your blood, sign up to donate your bone marrow.
The Broadview 6 case was assigned to Judge April Perry, the one who blocked the Trump administration from deploying the National Guard to Chicago, and I'm sure the defendants are not mad about it. The initial appearance is scheduled for November 10th before Magistrate Judge Heather Schein. The defendants are almost certain to plead not guilty and be released without bond. That will kick off discovery, and hopefully we'll find out more about the government's theory of the case, because a conspiracy requires an agreement between the parties, plus an overt action taken to effect that conspiracy. The indictment states in conclusory fashion that such an agreement existed between the defendants and that they swarmed the car in support of it. Maybe that's how it went down, maybe it isn't, but the government has to prove the existence of that conspiracy to make the defendants jointly responsible for everything that happened. They want to indict Abu Ghazaleh not just for standing in front of the car, but for ripping off the wiper in the window and scratching pig in the side, even if she didn't personally do any of those things. This distinction is very legally important. President Trump has made clear that he thinks protest is illegal. It's not. The right to peaceably assemble and petition the government for redress of grievances is explicitly protected by the First Amendment. But the Justice Department wants to make an end run around that by treating protest as a conspiracy, effectively punishing the entire assembly if one person breaks the law. So proving the existence of a conspiracy is key to securing a conviction. The defendants will certainly argue that there is no conspiracy, that they had no agreement, and they will certainly make a motion to dismiss for selective and vindictive prosecution, arguing that they were singled out for their speech and prosecuted where other similarly situated people were not. On the other hand, the whole thing took place in front of dozens of cameras, so even if they beat the conspiracy charge, it will be difficult for these defendants to argue that they did not individually block the car from getting inside the facility, if only briefly. The case seems to have inflamed tensions at Broadview even more. Over the weekend, state law enforcement officials, using some of the same tactics barred by Judge Ellis's temporary restraining order, clashed with protesters, and meanwhile, Abu Ghazaleh's fundraising continues to skyrocket. If the feds thought that they could neutralize a potential threat by arresting this woman, well, I guess they're not as good at internet memes as they think they are.
Now, after I started this channel, every week I'd get hundreds of comments and emails from viewers who are dealing with legal problems. And they'd ask, can you help me find a lawyer? How do I know if this attorney is any good? And there's a massive gap in our justice system. It's that people don't know how to find the right lawyer for their specific situation. They're scared, they're overwhelmed, and they end up doing nothing or hiring the first attorney who calls them back. And that really bothered me. So I started to wonder, what if there was a different way? What if we could build a law firm that actually lived up to the values that I talk about on this channel? Transparency, accessibility, and putting clients first instead of chasing billable hours. A firm where you don't need to pay anything up front, and your lawyers only get paid if you do, to maximize your opportunity for justice. So a few years ago, I decided to fix that problem. I decided to start my own personal injury law firm. And honestly, it wasn't an easy choice. But I realized I was in this unique position. I had this platform, this community, and the experience. Not to get rich, trust me, there are easier ways to make money than starting a law practice. But we did it because access to justice shouldn't be a luxury. Because finding the right legal representation shouldn't feel like playing Russian roulette with your future. And when you work with my firm, you're not just getting a lawyer. You're getting a team that understands that behind every case is a real person with real stakes. If we can't represent you, or you're in a state where we don't practice, we'll take the time to try to match you with an attorney in my personal network of lawyers. A national network of some of the best lawyers in the country who actually specialize in what you're going through, located right where you are, not just whoever happens to be available. So if you're dealing with a personal injury, a car crash, a data breach, sexual harassment, a social security or workers' comp issue, give us a call at the number on screen or click on the link below. Now, I can't represent everyone that watches this channel. I wish I could, but what I can do is make sure that when you need legal help, you have somewhere to turn to that you can trust. So whether it's me handling your case or the incredible attorneys we partnered with, you'll get the same principles of honesty and education that we bring to every video. And if you're dealing with a legal issue and you're not sure where to start, check out the link in the description. Let's have a conversation about how we can help you find not just a lawyer, but the right lawyer for your situation. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is all about, making sure that when life gets complicated, you don't have to face it alone. Which is why when you need a lawyer, you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle team.